meant to Cardi B's first-class nightmare, a story of power and prejudice. They called security on her before she even said a word. No greeting, no questions asked, just two officers summoned like backup, walking straight toward a black woman standing in line with a first-class boarding pass in her hand. The gate agent didn't even glance at the ticket. It wasn't necessary. "Ma'am, step aside." Those four short words were spoken with the kind of finality reserved for a criminal, not a customer. As she was quietly pulled from the queue, eyes followed her, not in protest but in confirmation. Because to them, she didn't look like someone who belonged in seat 1A. Not with that skin, not with that simple appearance, and certainly not with that calm, quiet demeanor. But here was the truth that no one at the gate could imagine. Not the flight crew, not the smug supervisor standing by the counter, and certainly not the man who walked through after her without so much as a glance at his ID. The woman they had just tried to humiliate didn't just buy a first-class ticket. She owned something far more powerful than that. Today, Cardi B held a first-class ticket neatly stored in her phone. But from the moment she stepped into the priority line for first-class passengers, suspicious and probing looks had begun to fall on her. They scrutinized her clothing, her simple ponytail, and began whispering. When it was her turn, Cardi stepped forward calmly, holding up the screen of her phone, showing her first-class ticket clearly to the young man at the counter. Clout. Dressed in a sharp suit with a shiny name tag, Clout flashed a polite smile to the previous passenger. But as soon as Cardi approached, his expression changed instantly. The smile vanished, replaced by an air of suspicion. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Clout said coldly, almost condescendingly. "This is the line for first-class and business-class passengers." "I know," Cardi replied briefly, her voice calm but firm. She kept the phone screen right in front of him. Clout glanced at the ticket distractedly, not even bothering to scan it. He immediately turned his head, whispered something to a colleague nearby, and signaled for two security officers to approach. Cardi felt the situation slipping out of control, but she remained composed. Passengers behind her began to murmur, some glancing at her with annoyance. The tension in the air grew thick. The two security officers, tall and dressed in dark blue uniforms, approached quickly. One of the men looked at her with a cold, stern gaze. "Please step out of line for us to check," he ordered. "Did I do something wrong?" Cardi asked, trying to stay calm, though she was beginning to feel frustrated with the clear discrimination. "Just follow our instructions," the security officer replied, his voice as cold as his demeanor. Cardi was pulled aside amid the judging looks and whispers of the onlookers. She glanced at Clout, who was now standing with his arms crossed, a look of satisfaction on his face, as if he had just handled an unwelcome intruder. She stood still, took a deep breath to maintain her composure. She knew she wasn't a typical passenger today, but those around her had no idea who she really was. She silently told herself, "They don't know that I'm the one who decides the future of this airline." In that moment, Cardi made the decision to remain silent. She wanted to see just how far this discrimination would push her. None of those who had just looked at her with disdain could have imagined that, just a few hours later, the entire airport system would be shaken by the real power this seemingly simple woman held in her hands. As Cardi was escorted away, those around her breathed a sigh of relief, their eyes filled with judgment, as if she were a lost guest trying to intrude into a world that didn't belong to her. But amidst the murmurs of racial bias, no one knew that she was the one holding invisible power. Power enough to completely change the fate of this prestigious airline. Cardi B was not just a regular passenger with a first-class ticket in hand. She was the one holding the final vote in a $4 billion merger deal between Havenport Air and Genesis Financial Holdings. Just one signature from her could instantly disrupt the entire financial system, business strategy, and the future of thousands of employees. However, Cardi wasn't here to show off her power or prove herself. She had arrived at the airport early this morning with a special task, one assigned by the board of Genesis Holdings, to conduct a reality check on how Havenport Air treated customers who appeared to be inconsequential. "We need to know," the chairman of Genesis had said to her in a closed-door meeting, "how they treat someone they consider insignificant. Give them a chance to show their true face." At this moment, Cardi stood silently in a corner where two security officers were unnecessarily checking her documents. She calmly surveyed the surroundings, the indifferent faces of the airport staff, the smug look of Clout, the one responsible for this incident. All of it was evidence of the deep-seated prejudices they hid behind a facade of politeness. Clout wasn't an outright villain, but he was a perfect product of a silent system of discrimination, always ready to place doubts on those who didn't fit their mold. Clout, at just 27 years old, had always been proud of his job. Coming from a well-off family in the suburbs, he graduated with a degree in hospitality management and quickly rose to a customer service management position at JFK Airport. For Clout, his job was about protecting the comfort of high-end customers, ensuring no one crossed the boundaries of wealth unless they truly deserved it. However, Clout had never realized that the principles and biases he held had transformed him from a polite employee into someone complicit in perpetuating deep injustice and inequality. As Cardi calmly explained her situation to the security officers, Clout walked over and whispered to a colleague, loud enough for Cardi to hear. Probably just another upgrade with frequent flyer miles. I'm used to it. These people always think that as long as they have enough points, they have the right to bother real first-class passengers. Clout's colleague chuckled lightly and nodded in agreement. In that moment, Cardi felt a slight stir in her heart, but she showed no outward reaction. Having grown accustomed to such looks, she gently responded to the security officer. I have all the proper documentation and a valid ticket. Please verify it with the system once again. The security officer hesitated for a moment, but at Cardi's determined gaze, he reluctantly checked again. After scanning the QR code on her phone, the system emitted a confirming beep, and the screen displayed the large words, First Class Priority Passenger. The security officer immediately appeared flustered, glancing at Clout for an explanation. Clout shrugged, his expression now irritated, and signaled for Cardi to return to the queue. Cardi calmly walked back to the priority line, unaffected, as if nothing had happened. But her silence now carried a power that made Clout and those around him feel uncomfortable and uneasy. Cardi had decided to keep her identity a secret, for what she wanted to see was not empty apologies from those who had wronged her, but how the entire system operated and treated someone they believed would not fight back. She walked lightly onto the jet bridge, the whispers of passengers behind her still filled with doubt and discussion about her. However, none of them knew that in just a few hours the name Cardi B would become the worst nightmare in the careers of those silently belittling her now. Cardi sat in her first-class seat, exhaling a deep breath, her eyes gazing out the window. She thought to herself, they just awakened a power they never expected, and now it's my turn to decide their fate. From the moment Cardi settled into her first-class seat, she knew the biggest challenge still lay ahead. The real purpose of this trip wasn't simply to experience a typical luxury flight. In fact, Cardi was secretly carrying out a top-secret mission. She had been entrusted by Genesis Financial Holdings to assess the attitude and behavior of Havenport's staff toward anonymous passengers, those they assumed did not belong in such a prestigious environment. Cardi had deliberately chosen the simplest attire she could, a dark hoodie, faded jeans, and a slightly worn pair of sneakers. Over her shoulder was a plain canvas bag with no logos from any high-end brand. Her appearance could not have been more ordinary, without any sign of power or fame. But that was exactly what Cardi wanted, a true mirror to reflect the true face of this esteemed airline. As soon as Cardi settled in, she began to notice the scrutinizing gaze of head flight attendant Olivia Sloan. Olivia, a woman in her late 30s with neatly styled hair and a smile always ready for wealthy customers, lost her smile the moment her eyes landed on Cardi. Her gaze shifted to one of suspicion, as if Cardi's presence was an anomaly, an uncomfortable deviation in a space reserved for the elite. As other passengers settled into their seats, Olivia immediately began serving the first-class customers with marked enthusiasm. She hurried over to a middle-aged businessman's seat, kindly offering him a warm towel. When it was Cardi's turn, Olivia hesitated for a moment before quickly turning away, moving toward the row behind her, intentionally bypassing Cardi as if she were an invisible, empty seat. Cardi sat still, fully aware that every step and gesture was being observed and judged. This wasn't just casual indifference. It was a clear message of prejudice and contempt. But Cardi said nothing, made no reaction. She knew that silence was the best way to let people like Olivia reveal their true nature. Olivia Sloan had grown up in a middle-class family in Connecticut and always dreamed of rising to a higher social class. Her role as a head flight attendant at Havenport Air had granted her access to the glamorous world she had always desired. But it was also this very access that led Olivia to unconsciously believe she had the right to decide who belonged in this luxurious space and who did not. To her, someone like Cardi B clearly didn't meet the proper criteria for sitting in first class, no matter the fact that Cardi's ticket proved otherwise. A little while later, Olivia passed by again. Cardi gently raised her hand to signal her. "Excuse me, I haven't received the warm towel like the other passengers." Olivia looked at Cardi with a glance that tried to mask her irritation, offering a forced, awkward smile. "Oh, I thought you didn't need it. I'll be back in a moment." With that, Olivia hurried away, leaving Cardi once again sitting in silence. But Cardi wasn't angry. Instead, she felt a deep sense of disappointment. She understood that this was just a small part of the larger picture of discrimination that passengers like her endured every day. When Olivia returned with the warm towel in hand, she handed it to Cardi dismissively, without any apology or explanation. Cardi took it gently, saying, "Thank you." But Olivia quickly turned away, leaving her with a look still full of suspicion and discomfort. The more Cardi observed, the more she realized one thing. These attitudes didn't stem from an individual alone. It was the result of an entire underground system where racial and social status prejudices had deeply infiltrated the minds of those who operated it. Olivia Sloan and Clout weren't inherently evil, but they were both typical products of a culture of subtle contempt, where judging others by their appearance had become routine. Cardi leaned back in her seat, gazing at the sky through the small window beside her. A sense of determination began to grow, clearer within her than ever before. She silently promised herself that today would be the day she forced all these people to face the consequences of the attitudes they so carelessly displayed. Because Cardi knew that in just a few hours, she would no longer be an anonymous passenger testing the system. The power she held in her hands was enough to change everything. To make people like Olivia and Clout regret the way they treated her today. She smiled gently, silently thinking to herself, "Keep going. I want to see just how far you think you can go." Even as the plane gently lifted off the runway, the moments Cardi had just experienced at security still lingered in her mind. She clearly remembered every skeptical question from Clout in the cold, uncomfortable demeanor of the TSA agent, subtle discrimination veiled under the guise of random checks. The moment Cardi stood before airport security, Clout had quickly appeared, eyeing her with a look of suspicion, as if searching for some evidence to prove that she didn't belong in this world. "What are you doing in Boston?" Clout asked, his tone more interrogative than curious. "Work," Cardi responded briefly but clearly. "What kind of work?" Clout pressed, his gaze never leaving her face, waiting for a slip-up. Cardi calmly looked him in the eye, keeping her voice gentle but firm. "A crucial meeting." Clout wasn't satisfied with that answer. He turned to the TSA agent standing nearby and whispered something. The agent immediately walked over and coldly told Cardi, "Please step aside for additional security screening." Cardi immediately understood that this wasn't the random check they wanted her to believe it was. This was a deliberate attempt to make things difficult for her. Discrimination cloaked under the pretext of airport security procedures. The TSA agent instructed Cardi to open her handbag. He rifled through her belongings with a detached attitude, showing no respect. Cardi stood silently, patiently observing. Her bag held only a few basic personal items and a sealed envelope. The agent stopped, holding the envelope up and asking suspiciously, "What is this?" "Work documents," Cardi replied calmly. "What kind of documents?" He continued to interrogate. Cardi took a soft breath and responded evenly. "Confidential information related to a major deal for my company." The TSA agent stared at her, his expression filled with more doubt. He handed the envelope to Clout, seemingly seeking confirmation from him. Clout scrutinized the outside of the envelope, then coldly said, "All right, let her go." Cardi took her bag and envelope back, receiving no apology. She walked toward the boarding gate, her heart heavy, not with anger, but with deep disappointment in the reality unfolding around her. What had just happened was the clearest proof of a silent but powerful form of discrimination. It wasn't carried out through overt, violent actions, but through the subtle doubts and probing questions of people like Clout and the TSA agent. Clout stood there, watching Cardi with an expression of both frustration and disappointment. He couldn't understand why Cardi remained so calm. In Clout's mind, people like Cardi should have panicked, should have been threatened, should have felt fear from the pressure he deliberately exerted. But Cardi was different. Her silence and composure made Clout feel more uneasy than ever. Cardi climbed the airplane steps, gently sitting down in her seat and letting out a long, quiet breath. She looked out the window, the sky stretching out in an endless sea of blue, with not a cloud in sight. But Cardi knew all too well that the invisible clouds of prejudice and injustice still hovered over her, and many others, growing thicker with each passing day. She silently reminded herself that this time, she would not remain silent forever. What had just happened only strengthened her resolve. Cardi was not simply an ordinary passenger. She was here to make the entire system face itself. "You picked the wrong person to underestimate," Cardi thought to herself, her gaze sharpening with determination. "Now get ready to face the consequences of the actions you've caused." As soon as the airplane door closed, Cardi realized that this flight would not be as easy as she had hoped. While on the ground, the doubts from Clout and the TSA agent had disappointed her. But on this flight, the deliberate coldness from head flight attendant Olivia Sloan hurt even more. Olivia Sloan moved gracefully between the first-class seats, always wearing a bright smile for each passenger she deemed worthy. But the moment Olivia's eyes met Cardi's, that smile immediately vanished, replaced by a cold, indifferent stare. She walked past Cardi's seat as if it didn't exist, an invisible void between the luxurious leather seats. Other passengers were promptly offered warm towels, welcome drinks, and menus featuring upscale meals. When it was Cardi's turn, Olivia deliberately ignored her, not even glancing in her direction. This wasn't a small oversight or accidental indifference. It was a deliberate act, a powerful message of contempt that Olivia wanted to send to Cardi. Cardi gently raised her hand when Olivia passed by again. "Excuse me, I haven't received a menu or a drink." Olivia turned back, feigning surprise, her eyes wide as if trying to remember something. "Oh, really? I thought you didn't need one. Wait a moment," she said. With that, Olivia quickly walked away, but Cardi could see in her eyes that there was no goodwill or regret. A few minutes later, Olivia returned and placed a cold drink in front of Cardi, completely different from the premium drinks being served to other passengers. The menu was placed down reluctantly, and Olivia didn't say a word, nor did she offer even a fake smile. Cardi remained calm and gently asked, "I noticed the other passengers received warm towels. May I have one as well?" Olivia stopped, her eyes showing brief annoyance, but she quickly covered it with a faint, cold smile. "Sorry, we have a limited number of towels. I'll check to see if there are any left and come back." Cardi knew that the answer was a lie. In fact, there were always plenty of towels prepared on first-class flights. But Cardi didn't react strongly. She simply nodded. "Thank you, I'll wait." Olivia quickly walked to the service area, a touch of frustration in her step. To Olivia, Cardi's presence in first class was not only an anomaly, but also a nuisance she was trying to dismiss. Olivia had always taken pride in her ability to serve high-end customers, but that came with a critical assessment of each passenger's appearance, attitude, and style. In her world, Cardi clearly didn't meet any of the standards to be treated like a true VIP. Olivia had grown up in an environment that valued glamour, luxury, and high standards. Over the years working for Havenport Air, she had become accustomed to serving powerful, wealthy passengers. And with each encounter, Olivia further reinforced her belief that she belonged to that elite class. For her, Cardi sitting in first class today wasn't just an oversight. It was a personal insult, something she would not accept easily. When Olivia returned, she handed Cardi a cold, damp towel, completely different from the warm, lavender-scented towels offered to the other passengers. Olivia didn't explain, didn't apologize, and quickly placed the towel down, leaving immediately, as if she were eager to avoid any more contact with Cardi. Cardi held the cold towel in her hand, letting out a quiet sigh. She wasn't angry, but she deeply felt the injustice and discrimination happening silently on this flight. Cardi knew that Olivia's actions weren't just an individual misstep. They were a reflection of a deep-seated system of prejudice embedded in the culture of this airline. Cardi's gaze drifted toward the window, the sky now clearer and broader. But within her, there was a growing sense of resolve. Cardi was no longer surprised, but she wasn't planning to give up or tolerate this forever. She gently clenched her hand, her eyes sharpening. Cardi understood that it was time for people like Olivia Sloan to face the consequences of the discriminatory attitudes they had come to treat as normal. Cardi whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning. Soon they'll realize the biggest mistake they made was choosing the wrong person to underestimate." The cold towel that Olivia had placed before Cardi remained on the table, a symbol of the indifference and subtle discrimination Cardi had endured since boarding the flight. But Cardi didn't allow herself to dwell on the discomfort for long because she knew the experiment was far from over. It could even become more intense. Less than 10 minutes later, Olivia Sloan returned to Cardi's seat, this time with a completely different attitude. Olivia was holding a tablet, her face deliberately serious, trying to emphasize the importance of the situation. "Miss Carter, I have a small issue I need to discuss with you." Cardi looked up, her gaze calm as she gently replied, "Yes, I'm listening." Olivia cleared her throat, attempting professionalism, though her voice still betrayed a hint of suppressed frustration beneath the veneer of politeness. "We've just received a notification from the ground crew. Due to some weight balance issues on the flight, I'm sorry to inform you that I must ask you to move to economy class." Cardi paused for a few seconds, staring deeply into Olivia's eyes, quickly realizing that the reason Olivia gave was nothing more than an unreasonable excuse, with no actual basis. In her heart, Cardi understood. This was simply an escalation, a petty tactic Olivia was using to put pressure on her. "I'm sorry," Cardi replied calmly, but her voice was firm. "But I have paid in full for this first-class seat. I don't think it's reasonable to ask me to change seats at this point." Olivia clearly felt uncomfortable with Cardi's gentle but resolute response. A flash of anger flickered in her eyes, but it was quickly hidden under her forced professional mask. "I understand, but this is a request from the ground crew to ensure the safety of the entire flight. I hope you'll cooperate." Cardi gave a slight smile, looking at Olivia more deeply this time, as if to let her know that Cardi was fully aware of her intentions. "If it's truly an issue of weight balance, perhaps it would be better to check with the other passengers. I don't understand why I alone am being asked to move." Cardi's words were like a sharp needle, piercing through Olivia's professional facade. Olivia hesitated for a moment but quickly regained her fake serious expression, responding mechanically. "We've carefully reviewed the situation, and unfortunately, your seat is the most appropriate choice." Cardi looked at Olivia one more time, her gaze still calm, her voice gentle but unwavering. "I'm truly sorry, but I will be keeping this seat. If there is really a safety issue, I think the airline should come up with a more reasonable solution than forcing a customer who has booked a first-class ticket to move to economy." Olivia instinctively gripped her tablet tightly, her face flushing with anger and frustration. She wasn't used to being so directly challenged by a customer, especially not from someone she had been looking down on since Cardi first boarded. To Olivia, Cardi wasn't just an inappropriate passenger anymore. She was someone daring to defy the power and prestige Olivia had always prided herself on. Deep down, Olivia couldn't accept this. Cardi's firm refusal wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a direct blow to Olivia's pride, to the belief that she was the one who had the right to decide who deserved what position on the flight. Olivia struggled to control her voice, which trembled with anger, and responded briefly with a cold expression. "I will report your refusal to cooperate to the captain. If anything arises, we won't take responsibility." Cardi calmly nodded, never losing her composure. Very well, I completely agree. Olivia turned and walked briskly toward the service area, each step carrying the frustration that was boiling inside her. She felt diminished, challenged in a way she had never encountered before. In Olivia's eyes, Cardi was no longer just a passenger. She was an adversary that Olivia now felt compelled to subdue at any cost. Cardi sat alone, taking a deep breath, her gaze still fixed on the window. She knew that this confrontation wasn't just a personal matter between her and Olivia. It was a battle against an entire system of subtle discrimination. The determination and calm she showed weren't just to defend her own rights, but to make people like Olivia realize something important. Not everyone will easily submit to the power they think they hold in their hands. Cardi whispered to herself, "Keep raising the tension. I'm ready to face it all. And in the end, you will be the ones to pay the price." The tense atmosphere between Cardi and Olivia had barely settled when, from the row beside her, a deep, grating voice suddenly broke the silence of the first-class cabin. "I don't understand how someone like her could be here." The speaker was Robert Davis, a middle-aged white businessman with neatly combed gray hair, exuding an air of arrogance and confidence. He wasn't trying to speak softly. Rather, his voice was loud enough for everyone around, including Cardi, to hear clearly. Cardi was momentarily taken aback by this open insult, but she quickly regained her composure. Her gaze briefly shifted to Robert Davis, who was looking at her with clear disdain, as if she were an anomaly in the world of elites, a foreign object out of place in their space. "I've flown first class many times, but this is the first time I've seen a passenger who looks like this in the premium cabin." Robert continued, his voice dripping with discomfort. The passengers around them immediately turned their gaze toward Cardi, some trying to hide smirks, while others silently observed, waiting for an explanation from her. Olivia Sloan, sensing the opportunity, quickly moved closer, a fake smile plastered on her face. She lowered her voice just enough for everyone to hear clearly, siding with Robert. Maybe she upgraded using frequent flyer miles. It happens sometimes. It's really unfortunate if someone feels uncomfortable because of it. Immediately, a few chuckles arose from the nearby passengers, clearly amused by Olivia's insinuating comment. Robert nodded in approval as if he had just received a reasonable explanation for Cardi's baffling presence in first class. Cardi felt her heart race slightly at the blatant offense, but instead of getting angry or engaging in an argument, she remained calm, her eyes unwaveringly fixed on Olivia and Robert. She spoke softly but clearly, enough for everyone around to hear every word. "I don't think using frequent flyer miles or purchasing a ticket directly should make a passenger different in terms of their rights or dignity on this flight. All first-class passengers deserve the same respect, don't they?" Olivia was momentarily surprised by Cardi's composed and firm response. She had been expecting some confusion or anger from Cardi, but the calm confidence in her tone made Olivia feel more challenged than ever before. Robert Davis furrowed his brow, clearly displeased that Cardi had responded so calmly. In Robert's mind, people like Cardi shouldn't speak up, especially not with the confidence and equality that matched his own. In his prejudiced worldview, Cardi had disrupted the natural order, and he couldn't accept that so easily. "I'm just voicing the thoughts of many people here," Robert responded coldly, trying to salvage some of his dignity. "But clearly, she doesn't fit in like the others. Some people truly belong in places like this, and some don't." His words were like a sharp knife, but Cardi remained unfazed. She simply smiled gently and responded in a measured tone, "Perhaps Mr. Davis has never considered that sometimes the people he deems unfit for this place are actually the ones holding the most important things that he can't even imagine." Cardi's implied words and her unusual calmness made Robert feel uneasy, a cold shiver running down his spine. Olivia sensed it too, but her pride and ingrained biases quickly drowned out that feeling. Olivia quickly regained her usual cold composure, giving Cardi one last glance before turning away, leaving behind a murmuring atmosphere filled with the whispers of other passengers. Cardi leaned back in her seat, her gaze directed toward the window. In her heart, there was no anger or sorrow, only a stronger resolve than ever before. The insults just now didn't wound her. In fact, they only added fuel to the fire of determination inside her. Cardi silently vowed with great strength, "They've gone too far. It's time for me to show them that true power doesn't always need to speak loudly. It just needs to act at the right time and in the right place." As the plane gently touched down on the runway, Cardi's mind remained heavy from the insults she had endured from Olivia Sloan and Robert Davis. She quietly gathered her belongings, preparing to leave the plane in a weary mood. But little did she know, the situation was far from over. As soon as the cabin door opened, two airport security officers swiftly boarded the plane. They moved quickly, their cold eyes scanning the cabin before they stopped at Cardi's seat. One of them spoke in a stern and emotionless tone. "Are you Cardi B? We need you to come with us for some clarification." Cardi flinched slightly, feeling her heart race. The curious, even suspicious, stares from the surrounding passengers turned toward her once again, as if she were some kind of threat. Robert Davis and Olivia Sloan watched her with smug expressions, clearly enjoying the scene unfolding before them. Cardi kept her composure, standing up and gently asking the security officers, "May I ask why?" The security officer coldly responded, "We've received a report regarding your suspicious and disruptive behavior on the flight. We request your cooperation." Cardi didn't argue further. She knew that any resistance would only worsen the situation. Quietly, she followed the two officers as they led her through the row of seats, the eyes of the passengers around her still on her, their whispers full of judgment. Her gaze met Olivia's triumphant face as she stood near the airplane door, wearing a satisfied, knowing smile, as if she had achieved her goal. Cardi was escorted to a small, dimly lit room in a secluded area of the airport, where the harsh fluorescent lights made the atmosphere even more tense. The room was bare except for an old wooden table, two cold metal chairs, and a dull gray wall. She clearly felt as though she was being treated like a criminal, being detained for an unfounded investigation. A few minutes later, an older security officer entered, his face stern, holding a report that had clearly been printed in haste. He sat across from Cardi, looking at her with cold, skeptical eyes, then began his questioning. "We've received a report that you engaged in disruptive behavior on the flight. Can you explain this?" Cardi took a deep breath, trying to remain calm despite the storm of injustice she was facing. "I'm not clear on which specific behavior you're referring to. I was completely cooperative and polite throughout the flight." The officer glanced down at the report in his hands and read aloud in an accusing tone. "According to the statements of head flight attendant Olivia Sloan and another passenger, Mr. Robert Davis, you engaged in defiant behavior, refused to comply with safety instructions, caused disruption to the staff, and made the other passengers feel uncomfortable." Cardi paused for a moment. The accusations were absurd, yet they had been carefully crafted to undermine her honor and rights. She understood immediately that this was a direct retaliation from Olivia, trying to use her authority to make Cardi pay for her disobedience. Cardi looked straight into the officer's eyes, her voice still calm but filled with a conviction. "None of those accusations are true. I only requested my legitimate rights in a polite manner. I have never defied anyone or caused any trouble." The officer remained cold, his eyes narrowing as if trying to read her thoughts. Then he answered briefly with a lingering doubt. "What you're saying is completely contradictory to the testimonies of the witnesses on the plane. I will need you to stay here for further clarification." Cardi felt the weight of the injustice pressing down on her. This wasn't just an ordinary interrogation. It was an invisible punishment, a way for the system to crush her confidence and dignity. But Cardi didn't allow herself to break under pressure. She knew who she was, and she wouldn't let them easily achieve their goals. She looked at the officer one more time, her gaze firm and clearer than ever. "If you want clarification, I'm happy to cooperate, but I suggest you double-check your information. I believe the truth will soon be revealed, and those who made false accusations will have to be held accountable." The officer raised his eyebrows slightly, seemingly surprised by Cardi's calm and resolute demeanor. But he said nothing more, standing up and leaving the room, leaving her alone between the cold walls. Cardi sighed lightly, her eyes staring into the empty space before her. A powerful resolve surged inside her. They've made a huge mistake trying to insult and detain me. I won't let this slide. It's time for them to understand the real power I hold. The small, dimly lit room sank into silence. After the security officer closed the door behind him, Cardi sat still on the cold chair, her eyes straight ahead, but her mind was racing. She knew the moment had come to turn the tables. There was no room for silence or submission anymore. After a while, the door opened again, and this time a middle-aged man with a stern demeanor entered, followed by the younger security officer, Dana Tomaraz. The man was Eric Dempsey, a senior security supervisor at the airport. Eric pulled out a chair and sat across from Cardi, his face clouded with discomfort. Miss Carter, I'm Eric Dempsey, in charge of security here. We've received reports that you caused a disturbance on the flight. I need a clear explanation from you about these actions. Cardi looked up at Eric and Dana, her calm gaze making them both feel uneasy. Slowly and deliberately, Cardi opened her simple cloth bag and pulled out a special envelope, sealed with a bright red wax stamp. Her movement was gentle, yet authoritative, as if sending a warning that what was about to happen was no trivial matter. Before we continue this conversation, Cardi spoke softly but with a hidden strength. I'd like you both to take a look at this. Eric and Dana exchanged a brief, puzzled glance. Cardi placed the envelope on the table, pushing it lightly toward them. Eric took it cautiously, opening the seal with a careful hand, his heart racing with tension and unease. As the contents of the document became clear before their eyes, Eric's expression shifted from confident to stunned, then to complete shock. Beside him, Dana Reyes couldn't hide her surprise and fear. The document was legal, clearly identifying Cardi B and her true role. She was the one holding the final decision-making power in the $4 billion merger between Havenport Air and Genesis Financial Holdings. The sharp lines of text hit Eric and Dana like a series of blows, leaving them dazed by this earth-shattering revelation. Cardi was not just an ordinary passenger. She was someone whose existence and decisions could alter the fate and future of the airline itself. Is this real? Eric stammered, his voice shaking, his eyes never leaving the document in his hand. Cardi nodded gently, her gaze still calm but brimming with authority. It's completely true. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to evaluate,